Ethan Cole lived a quiet life after the wars were done. He was a soldier for many years, traveling far from home and fighting battles on many frontiers. When the guns went silent and the flags were raised, he came back to the great city of Ardent. It was a place of shining towers, iron bridges, and endless streets, yet for Ethan, the city felt colder than the battlefield. On the field, he had purpose. In the city, he had nothing but the walls of a small empty room. Most nights were the same. He would sit on his narrow cot, staring out the window where the tall lights of the city glimmered. He had medals hidden in a box beneath the bed. Medals no one asked about. He had scars across his arms and his chest. Scars no one cared to see. A soldier without war quickly became a man without meaning. That night was colder than usual. The faint hum of the city engines filled the air. Ethan sighed, removed his boots, and lowered himself onto the cot. He thought of the men he fought beside, many of them gone now, their names carved in stone, somewhere back on the edge of the frontier. He thought of the silence that filled his chest at night. His body was strong, but his spirit carried the weight of loss. He closed his eyes, telling himself, as he did every evening, that tomorrow might feel different. Sleep came slowly but heavily. His breath steadied, and the world of the waking faded behind him. When he opened his eyes, however, nothing made sense. The cot beneath him was gone. The plain metal walls of his room were gone as well. Instead, he lay on soft sheets, warm and smooth across his skin. A faint golden glow lit the chamber around him. It was not his room, nor any place he had seen before. Ethan's body froze, locked between confusion and caution. His arms, which had curled up as he had fallen asleep, were not empty. They held someone. He looked down, his breath caught in his throat. There, resting in his arms, was a woman. Her hair fell like amber silk against his chest, her face calm in deep sleep. She wore a simple gown of white, though light glimmered faintly in the fabric, as if it carried threads of silver. Resting near his shoulder was a small crown, delicate and bright. His mind raced. He knew her face, not from memory, but from every mural and banner across the city. It was Queen Evelyn. The queen of all realms, ruler of the great nation's throne, the woman every noble swore their life to protect. And here she was, asleep in his hold, as if he had been meant to guard her all along. Ethan's heart pounded so hard he thought it might wake her. He slowly, carefully tried to move his arm, but the queen stirred only slightly, her hand resting soft against him as though she belonged in that place. He shut his eyes, hoping it was a dream, some wild trick of his tired mind. But when he opened them again, the golden glow of the chamber remained, and the queen still lay in his embrace. Her breath was steady and calm, her lips parted just slightly as she slept. He whispered her name without meaning to, testing if sound itself would shatter the vision. Evelyn. But she did not wake, nor did the vision fade. Questions thundered within him. Why was he here? How could this be? Was he chosen or cursed? Mistaken or blessed? A soldier such as him had no place in royal chambers, much less cradling the sovereign herself. If guards entered now, he would be dead before she could even explain. But part of him did not want to move. That warmth, that peace he had not felt in years, was stronger than reason. As the moments stretched, Ethan realized something deeper. The way her brow smoothed, the way her body rested in calm against him, she looked not like a queen ruling over millions. She looked like a woman, weary and vulnerable, needing safety like any other soul. And though he did not understand why, it was his arms that gave her that safety. Sleep tugged at his eyes once more, though he fought to stay awake. The chamber glowed gently, the silence deafening yet sacred. Ethan felt as though the world outside his sight had shifted. That destiny had taken him without permission and placed him at the center of something far beyond his reach. He was a soldier alone, unwanted by the world he had bled for. Yet here, in this unreal moment, in arms that should have been empty, he held the queen who carried the hope of a people. He tried to make sense of it, but his tired mind could not. The only truth left was the warmth of her breath and the steady beat of her heart near his chest. And so he lay still, afraid to move, afraid to break what felt like the beginning of a story he could not yet name, but one his soul already knew would change everything. Ethan did not move for a long time. He kept his arms around the queen, still afraid this was a dream. The golden light of the chamber filled every corner, but there was no sound outside. Slowly, Queen Evelyn stirred. Her eyes opened, calm and clear, and she looked up at the soldier holding her. Ethan tried to speak, but his throat was dry. Words refused to come out. Before he could find his voice, she whispered his name. "Ethan," she said it softly. Not in command, not in fear, but in a way that felt as though she had known him all her life. His heart pounded harder as he pulled back slightly, giving her space. He wanted to stand, to bow, to do anything else but remain so near her. Yet she did not let him move away. Her hand reached to rest on his arm, steady and gentle, as if she wanted him to stay exactly where he was. Finally his voice rasped out. "How do you know me? I am no one to you." Evelyn looked at him with eyes that carried both calm and sorrow. She said she had seen him many times in her dreams. She described battlefields where he stood as a wall of iron holding back enemies. She spoke of nights filled with fire where she found him standing in the center of the storm like a shield. She said his face was clear to her even before this moment, and that she knew she would one day wake with him by her side. Ethan shook his head. He thought it impossible. Dreams were dreams, and nothing more. He was a soldier who had stumbled through life with nothing but survival. Yet her voice carried such surety that he felt no ground beneath him. Asked her again why he was here, in her chamber, holding her like something more than a guard. Evelyn did not answer in words that satisfied him. She only said that the world outside was breaking. Powers rose, hungry hands reached for her throne, and the people's trust was fragile like thin glass. She said that in her visions, every path apart from him ended in ruin, but with him there was hope. Ethan stared at her. He could not understand. Why would a queen see him, a forgotten soldier in a crowded empire, as her only answer? He wanted to deny it, to say she was mistaken. But the way she looked at him, eyes unshaken, left him silent. The golden chamber faded slowly then, and to Ethan's shock, they stood together not in a dream but in the real palace. High walls carved from white stone stretched above them. Guards rushed toward the doors, and a minister with sharp eyes stepped in. At the sight of Ethan, swords were drawn. The queen raised her hand before voices could rise. She told the minister that the man beside her was not a threat, but her chosen protector. The guards hesitated, not daring to question her. The minister pressed for explanation, but Evelyn dismissed him as calmly as if she had announced her decision over supper. She ordered that Ethan remain, and that he be treated with the full respect of the court. Ethan felt the weight of angry stares pressing against him. He knew these men viewed him as filth, a ragged soldier pulled from some forgotten campaign. To them he was unworthy of stepping in the same halls as their queen. Yet Evelyn did not blink, nor did she take back her words. She moved closer, until her hand touched his once again, making it clear she would not release him. When the hall cleared, Ethan whispered to her that she was putting herself in danger. The ministers would scheme and plot. The guards would resent him. Could not be the reason the palace began to crumble. Evelyn only smiled faintly and said every crown is heavy with risk, and that the people had followed crowns for too long. It was time they trusted hearts. Ethan could not argue against her belief. His instincts told him to turn away, to flee the palace before steel pierced his back. When her hand lingered on his, steady and warm, he stayed. That night, Ethan was given a chamber beside hers. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. He thought about the fire in her eyes when she claimed him before the court. He thought about what kind of story he had just stepped into. He was a soldier who only wanted silence. But now he was bound to a queen whose fate pulled him into the center of storms greater than any war he had fought before. When sleep finally came, it was filled with strange images that blurred between future and past. Shadows of enemies rising against a throne, towers falling, crowds chanting, queens standing tall, though alone, always somewhere near. He saw his own hands shielding her from the chaos. Ethan woke with cold sweat. He sat on the edge of the bed, running his hand over his face. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of more than survival pressing on his chest. Felt the weight of destiny, the silent truth that the queen's words might not be just hope, but something far stronger. Ethan spent the next day inside the palace walls, trying to understand how his life had changed. Only 2 nights ago, he had been sleeping in his small, lonely room. But now he lived inside the grand halls of white stone, watched by guards and whispered about by nobles. The ministers and courtiers gave him sharp glances every time he passed. They saw a man with rough boots, scarred hands, and a soldier's stance. He had no fine clothes, no title before his name, and no family with power. To them, he was no more than dust carried into the heart of their kingdom. Yet they did not dare speak against him openly, for the queen herself had declared him her protector. Queen Evelyn walked with him through the wide halls. She spoke to him as though he was her equal, never raising her voice and never shying from his gaze. Ethan found it strange. Most rulers he had known kept their distance from men like him. But Evelyn spoke softly of the burden of the crown, how it demanded decisions that weighed on her soul. He listened silently, never sure what advice to give. She did not need advice, he thought. What she needed was someone who would not abandon her. At night, Ethan stood guard outside her chamber door, though she told him it was not necessary. For him, it felt right. He had promised nothing with words, but in his heart he had already taken a vow. Soon he began to learn about the unrest within the city. Servants whispered about angry mobs that gathered beyond the gates. Farmers said their harvests had been taken for taxes, leaving their families hungry. Men who once swore loyalty now spoke of rebellion in alley corners and dark taverns. The throne was strong on the outside, but inside the cracks spread deeper than he had known. One evening, as he stood with Evelyn looking down from the high balcony, she pointed to the lights of the city below. She told him that those lights were not just houses but lives, and if the crown failed them, the kingdom would fall. Words struck Ethan because, beneath her royal tone, he saw the weight of loneliness in her eyes. A queen could command armies, but she could not command faith. Faith had to be kept alive, guarded like a flame in the dark. Ethan remembered his time on the frontier lines. Armies did not march for flags alone. They marched because of trust. Soldiers gave everything not for empires, but for the brothers and sisters beside them. If the people no longer trusted Evelyn, her crown would mean nothing. That night, he told her stories from the front. He spoke of men who stood against hopeless odds because someone believed they could. He spoke of how leaders with kind words could save thousands without ever drawing a sword. Evelyn listened closely, her eyes fixed on him. And for the first time, Ethan saw her smile not as a queen, but as a woman who felt understood. The peace did not last long. Days later, during a council meeting, Ethan walked with her into the grand chamber filled with ministers. The men bowed, but their voices soon rose against one another. They argued about coin, harvest, and army loyalty. One counselor shouted that the people were no longer afraid of the throne. Another warned that hungry crowds planned to storm the gates. When one minister dared to point at Ethan and say the queen's choice had made her weak, she silenced the room with a look. Evelyn declared that Ethan was not weakness, but proof that her throne was closer to the people than their polished shoes and golden chains. She said that the realm needed more than wealth and laws. It needed someone who stood as flesh and blood with them, not above them alone. Ethan said nothing, but inside him burned a strange fire. Never in his life had someone as high as her defended him with such strength. He realized then why she had taken him into her arms that night. Not because he was noble, not because he was special in the old sense of power, but because he was human, as the people were human. It was the bridge between her and those who no longer believed. That evening, as the sun set in crimson across the towers, Ethan stood by the queen's side with a new sense of certainty. Whatever force had brought him into her arms was no accident. Their bond was part of something larger than them both. He did not yet know what storms would come, but he knew he would meet them beside her. And when Evelyn looked at him with quiet faith, Ethan felt what he had not felt for years. Purpose. Not the purpose of war, but the purpose of a life worth protecting. The night was heavy with smoke from the city below. Ethan could see it from the high towers. Crowds gathered in the streets, holding torches and shouting words of anger. The kingdom he had once thought strong now looked fragile, like a wall ready to crack. Within the palace, the queen's ministers argued louder each passing hour. Some demanded harsh punishment for the crowds. Others begged her to promise food and peace. Voices clashed until it became noise. Ethan stood at her side, silent but alert. He saw how the men around her seemed more afraid of losing their own place than of saving the people. Late into the night, Evelyn stepped away from her council and spoke to Ethan alone. She told him the people did not hate her. Not yet, but they were desperate. Hunger could turn any heart dangerous. She feared that the fire outside would soon reach the palace gates. Ethan told her the truth. The crowd did not fear her armies. They no longer believed her throne could help them. If she wanted them to stand with her, she had to go to them herself. Evelyn looked at him in silence for a moment, then nodded. She had dreamed of this choice, she said, but never thought she would be brave enough to make it. With him at her side, she felt she could. The next morning, guards lined the palace walls as the sound of the crowd grew louder. Ministers begged the queen to stay inside, to let soldiers push the mob back. Evelyn ignored them. Dressed not in gold or jewels, but in a simple white gown, she walked to the gates. Ethan walked at her side, every muscle tense, ready to fight if needed. When the gates opened, the noise of the crowd poured in like a flood. Hundreds of voices shouted. Some cursed her name. Stones were clutched in rough hands. Ethan stepped forward, but Evelyn raised her hand and moved ahead, facing her people without fear. For a brief moment, the crowd quieted, surprised by the sight of the queen outside her safe walls. She spoke with a clear voice. She did not command them. She told them she knew their pain. She had listened to their hunger, and she did not hide from their anger. And then she told them she would not let the crown destroy the people. She promised to share the burden of their hardship. Some laughed bitterly, others jeered, but many listened. The queen's voice was not the cold speech of nobles. It was raw and real. Ethan could see it in the way some in the crowd lowered their stones, how their eyes softened, if only for a moment. Just as hope began to stir, a sharp cry broke out. Figures in dark cloaks pushed through the people, carrying hidden blades. They shouted for the queen's death and rushed forward. The crowd scattered in panic. Ethan moved like lightning. His blade was out before the first cloaked man reached her. Steel clashed, and cries rang out. Cut one down and pushed Evelyn back against the gates. More attackers charged. Guards from the wall rushed down, but Ethan knew he was the only line between her and the assassins until they arrived. He fought with the skill of years on the frontier. Every strike was precise. Every step was made to shield the queen. A blade sliced across his arm, but he did not falter. He threw one man to the ground and struck another, forcing them back. Evelyn stood steady, just behind him. Her face was pale but fearless. Even in danger, she did not run, and she trusted him, and that trust fueled him more than any army ever had. At last the guards arrived, overwhelming the attackers and dragging them away. The crowd, shaken and wide-eyed, watched in silence. Blood shone on Ethan's arm, but his body stayed tall. He looked at Evelyn, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. The image was clear. The queen standing with her soldier protector, alive and unbroken before the eyes of her people. Slowly, voices rose from the crowd. They were not cries of anger anymore. Many shouted her name, not with hate but with respect. Others dropped their stones and bowed their heads. That day, the crowd that had come to burn the gates left with new fire in their hearts, a fire of loyalty. Back in the palace, ministers who had once doubted were forced to see what Ethan already knew. Evelyn was not just a crown of jewels, she was the heart of the people. That night, Ethan sat alone with the queen. She wrapped his wounded arm with her own hands. She told him that no crown could ever command the devotion he had shown. She promised him that together they would not only defend the throne but rebuild the faith of the people. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time in his life, he believed he had found something worth fighting for that was larger than war. He had found a queen who chose him not as a soldier alone, but as someone who carried her burden beside her. The days that followed the attack at the palace gates changed everything. The people who had once shouted anger now whispered of courage and hope. They spoke of their queen who faced them without fear, and of the soldier who stood between her and certain death. Word spread across the kingdom faster than any army could march. The name of Queen Evelyn and her protector Ethan was on every tongue. But peace was fragile. The assassins had not worked alone. Behind them stood groups of lords who wanted the crown for themselves. They had wealth, soldiers, and plans of betrayal. Ministers warned Evelyn that they would soon march with banners of war. Ethan listened in silence as she stood before her council. The men argued once more, their voices filling the chamber. Some called for more armies. Some urged her to flee to safer lands. Others simply wanted to protect their own fortunes. The queen let them speak until their voices became meaningless. Then she raised her hand and all grew quiet. She said the throne could not be protected by fear or by hiding. They would not run, and they would not abandon the people. The people had shown faith in her at the gates, and now she would show faith in them. She would fight not as a queen behind walls, but as a leader among her people. Her words struck every heart in the chamber, yet only one face looked at her with complete trust. He nodded once, and in that small gesture, she knew he would follow her wherever she chose to go. Preparations began quickly. The loyal guards armed themselves. Men and women from the city volunteered to stand at the walls. Farmers brought tools and wood to build defenses. For the first time in many years, the palace and the city worked together, not as ruler and ruled, but as one. When the hostile lords arrived with their armies, they expected fear and surrender. Instead, they found gates strong with unity and streets filled with civilians who refused to kneel. At the front of the defense stood Queen Evelyn in her plain white gown. Beside her Ethan, steady and fierce with sword in hand. The battle that followed was long and brutal. Arrows darkened the sky. Fire spread across rooftops. Steel clashed against steel. Yet the spirit of the people held strong. They fought not simply for a queen, but for the right to stand free with her. In the thick of the fight, Ethan seemed to be everywhere. He led groups of guards into broken streets, cut through enemy lines, and held the ground where others faltered. His arm ached from wounds, but he never lowered his blade. Wherever Evelyn stood, he was not far. At one point, amid the chaos, an enemy knight broke through the lines and charged toward the queen. Ethan threw himself forward. The fight between them was short, but fierce. His blade struck true, and the knight fell. The people saw it, and a cry of victory rose above the noise of war. Hours later, as dawn broke, the enemy lords realized the city would not fall. Their men were tired, and their cause was broken by the sight of common folk fighting with royal guards at their side. Slowly, their forces withdrew, retreating into the hills. The battle was won. The city erupted in joy. Bells rang. People filled the streets, cheering the queen who had stood among them. They cheered for Ethan as well, the soldier who had fought not as noble, not as lord, but as one of them. His name, once forgotten, now belonged to legend. Inside the palace, Evelyn faced him quietly. She told him that crowns could be broken, thrones could fall, and cities could burn. But a bond like theirs could not be taken away, she said. He had given her not just safety, but the strength to lead with truth. Ethan looked at her and felt something deep. He had gone to war for flags, for orders, for survival. But now he had fought for a person, for trust, and for love that did not need to be spoken aloud. That night the palace stood calm as the fires of battle faded. The queen was no longer alone in her burden, and Ethan no longer carried the weight of emptiness. They had found their strength together. Ethan thought back to the night this all began, when he had fallen asleep alone in his empty room. He had dreamt of nothing but silence, yet awoke with the queen in his arms. It had seemed like a mistake, a strange miracle he could not explain. But now he understood. The world had brought them together not by chance, but because hearts like theirs were stronger than crowns and sharper than swords. Alone, he was a soldier without meaning. Alone, she was a queen without trust. Together, they were the spirit of their people. Together, they were the reason humanity stood tall. And so began a new age, not of endless war or hollow power, but of unity. A queen with courage, a soldier with loyalty. A kingdom that would never forget the day hope returned.